Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part of our Indies Introduced series, where we spotlight debut authors handpicked by booksellers from around the country. In each episode, a bookseller from the Indies Introduced panel will interview the author of a debut title featured in our program.
Hi, welcome to the ABA podcast. My name is Lauren Pronger. I'm a bookseller from Chapterhouse Bookstore in Amarillo, Texas. We're on Route 66, and we specialize in queer, racialized, and migrant literature. Talking with me here today is Shafaq Khan, who is the author of a debut middle grade novel called Zeyna Lost and Found. Shafaq is a mom and lawyer born to Pakistani parents. She grew up in a small port city in Saudi Arabia called the Jubail Industrial City. After college and law school in New York City, she worked as a legal services attorney representing low-income people with disabilities facing eviction and benefits issues. In this role, Shafaq became acquainted with people's stories, the ones we tell and the ones we don't, and learned to listen to the stories beneath the surface. Zeyna Lost and Found is her debut novel. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her family and can be found online at shafaqkhan.com. So Zeyna Lost and Found is a historical fiction novel set in 1970 along the hippie trail going from Lahore to Istanbul and then on to London. And she is with her brother and her parents and one of her cousins, has to kind of stop an international gang of thieves called the 15 who have stolen the Shirin jewel from Iran, and also has to help her parents clear their names because everyone thinks that her parents stole the jewel, and so she has to find the jewel and then return it to Iran without the help of her parents. And so they have this great international adventure. It's kind of an anti-heist novel. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So Zeyna Lost and Found was sort of inspired by a real life trip that my mother-in-law took in the 70s. She herself is also British Pakistani, like the protagonist Zeyna. And they, went to Pakistan, and for various reasons, they weren't able to fly back to their home in London. And so then they went on the hippie trail. And so I think what I found really sort of fun about writing this book was the opportunity to focus on an era where travel was relatively seamless, sort of notion that feels beyond reality right now. And so there was an opportunity here to capture that moment in time, but also an opportunity to talk about issues of identity, which, I know I've experienced, and that many experience, like all of us experience, I think, in different ways, in our own ways. And I think being able to talk about those things, but with the adventure, I think, in the foreground, was a unique opportunity to sort of also explore my creativity, some sort of aspects of frankly imaginative fiction writing that I hadn't done for a while. Throw in some jokes that I think probably no one will get, but I will find some amusement in. And so I think the book will be sort of an opportunity to make a permanent record of my point of view, in case anyone wants to cross-examine me on those issues, like in the future. But I wanted to put something out there that was meaningful and important to me. And for anyone that's ever felt like they're on the outside looking in, and I think I've felt increasingly like each of us has felt that way, that we've been on the outside looking in, sometimes even within our own families and communities. We've felt out of place and uncertain in ways that Zeyna does. And so I wanted to give voice to that universal aspect of the human condition. But also, I think sort of in my head, I thought about, children like who are similarly situated to Zeyna, 12-year-olds who are sort of coming of age and are curious and have questions and are often poo-pooed and told to not ask those questions. But actually in this case, Zeyna's questions and curiosity, her critical thinking and problem solving sort of end up being the key skills that help her navigate this sort of problem of epic proportions. So I think I'm excited for people to go on this adventure with Zeyna, both the internal and external sort of adventure that she has in this book.
Absolutely. Well, so by the time this podcast comes out, your book will have been published. Congratulations on your debut. Your book is now sitting on shelves across the country, and a lot of readers are about to pick it up for the very first time. What was your favorite part of writing it? I know you kind of talked a little bit about that. Did you have like a specific thing that maybe was your favorite scene to write, or your favorite part of just writing something that you know people are going to read? And what do you hope that readers will get out of it?
Yeah. Thanks so much for that question. It's sort of hard to figure out what was my favorite part about writing it, but I would say it's the relationships between the different characters. And so I think, exploring the brother-sister dynamic between Zeyna and Maher, the family dynamic between Zeyna and her cousin, who, is sort of a new friend in a sense, but quickly becomes, I think, sort of resembles a familial relationship in ways that sort of don't necessarily correlate with how much time they're spending together, but it's like sort of the quality of that time that helps speed that process along. But also, sort of the nuclear relationships between the parents and Zeyna and her brother. And I think part of the reason why I think an exploration of relationships was really important to me is because, again, when we're thinking about an audience that is following this adventure and wants to know the next way that this, 12-year-old is outwitting adults in her life, I also want them to think about, well, what are some ways that she's leaning on the people in her life? What are some ways that those people matter to her? The way that the way that those relationships inform her decision making and her willingness to take on risks that a regular 12-year-old wouldn't, right? And I think what makes her extraordinary isn't just who she is, but I do think it is her. It's her bravery, it's her agency, it's her loyalty, but it's also the people around her, right? It's Maher's inventions and love, right? That is unconditional. It's her cousin Amina's sort of street smarts and jokes and her ability to sort of think clearly in sort of difficult situations. And it's her parents, I think, her parents being role models to her in so many ways, but also being flawed and her recognizing them for who they are. But all these relationships existing in their messiness on this adventure. And so I think balancing, moving the plot along, but also maintaining some level of like clarity in the trajectory of the actual relationships was like my most favorite part about this book.
Yeah, I think there are definitely a lot of really cool kind of moments where each of the characters are always true to themselves, but they also are, like you said, kind of flawed. So, or not even, they're just human, right? Zeyna is, for the most part, trying to keep a really strong face for her brother. But then a couple times it's just like, I'm freaked out and I don't know what to do. And so her cousin Amina or her brother will be like, okay, that's okay. We have you this time. Like, you were strong for us then, so we'll be strong for you now, and we're all going to get through it together. And that kind of relationship is really cool to see, for sure.
Yeah, and I think like so many of these like friendships that children are forming become really important in later years, right? Because they sort of set the background for how you think about engaging with people, period, right? And I think especially in this moment, there's just such a lack of that, right? We're so there's like so much isolation, and obviously some of that is just there's a variety of reasons that might be happening, but I think that isolation has carries with it like just a lot of feelings of like loneliness and despair, and I think it's the book kind of, and I think Zeyna in particular, hopefully lends itself to an opportunity to think about yourself as part of a collective, as part of a community. And even when we feel like we don't belong to that community, but we still want to try and we don't stop trying. And I think I really hope that people take away, and especially this audience, like takes away that at the end of the day, Zeyna doesn't stop trying to be part of of community, right? And that she doesn't stop trying to belong, and also that everyone deserves to belong, and because we're human, and that's like the reason why we deserve to belong.
Absolutely. And that she also kind of changes what she thinks that belonging is based on the new information that she gets, which is really important.
Yeah.
Like there is a certain character in the book that is an antagonist for a very long time. And then once she has some new information, kind of reassesses the character, which I think is really cool. So your book is historical fiction, which isn't that uncommon for middle grade. But typically, especially for middle grade, we see a lot of World War II books, or we see turn of the century. Right now, we're seeing a lot of like Y2K turn of the century books. But I think this is the first kids book I've seen that's set in 1970 or the 70s. What made you want to set the book in this particular decade, and what was special about that time period?
Right. Well, I think I, along with many others, view the 70s as like sort of this unique era. You think about hippies, you think about, like the cool aesthetic, and like just a level of, I think, maybe peace and freedom in ways that, again, might be sort of romanticized. But I think many of these countries were about to go through a big change. And I think that was one of the reasons why I thought this would be an interesting time to capture. I think we see photos of travelers on the hippie trail and sort of want to understand, like, how is this possible? And what does this even look like? And so in this process, I feel like I learned quite a bit about like just like the civic societies at that time, like, I mean, where do people eat? Where do they play? Where do they learn? Where do they shop? Like a theater in Kabul, a university in Tehran, like a cafe in Istanbul. Like I really wanted to better understand, like, what does the like public space even feel like, right? And what does it feel to really experience being alive in the 70s? And again, from the outsider's perspective, because Zeyna is new to all of these places, including Pakistan, where her parents are from. But I think a critical part of this is that I also didn't want to romanticize this time, because it was on the precipice of change, right? And paint it as being one way, and then after the change, it's now another way. So the book touches on sort of economic unrest mirrored in sort of the Bazaris in Tehran, who at that time were a litmus test for frankly just like for discontent, for political discontent. So oftentimes, like, it was like, well, how are the Bazaris feeling? And then that's kind of how you know what's going on. And so we understand also that faith isn't a monolith, right? So you see people in Zeyna sees people in Kabul dressed in different ways, and practicing their faith in different ways. So I think you peel off that initial layer of, wow, Zeyna just crossed like the Pakistan border into Afghanistan, like, and without adults and without much of a checkpoint, which is true. Like, I mean, I saw this photo of what that looked like, and it was, not a sort of militarized border, right? And so I think what you have when you kind of peel some of these layers off is hopefully maybe a questioning of how modernity is like defined and perceived. Like, what do we think is modern? What do we think is like acceptable? And and even just challenging like how the nation state came to be, right? Like, why is it that you have a city like Lahore, obviously a critical backdrop for some of the clues that Zeyna gets? Why is it that city is home to Zeyna, and her family, and they can kind of travel it. But then, Mr. Sukhwinder, someone that she's friends with in London, who is a Sikh man, may have lived there, but now does not live there any longer because of this sort of like arbitrary line that was drawn at some point. And so there is this like high human cost. And so I think the reason why I wanted to do this is because I felt like it was a chance to think a little bit about this time that we obviously view through a rosy lens, but had cracks, I think, that ultimately, sort of broke open to some of the changes that ended up happening.
For sure. I thought it was a very good time to show, like, partition happened fairly recently, but like East Pakistan hadn't broken away yet to become Bangladesh. And so there is kind of like some change has happened, but there's still so much more change to come. And seeing her cross all the different borders, and there are a couple lines in there where it's like, the land is the same. The people look the same. I would never have known that I crossed a border, except I saw we crossed a fence. And seeing all of the similarities between like the different kinds of chai that people drink, and stuff like that. It is really cool just to kind of be like, they're all slightly different cultures, maybe different languages, but all people with the same priorities and the same wants and needs. And that definitely comes into play as you see the different kind of protests, and the Bazaar is missing because they're probably on strike throughout the different places that they visit.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad that comes through. Like, I hope that this can be sort of like the beginning of a conversation, and sort of an opportunity for adults that might be reading this book to think critically as well about some of those, some of those events and some of sort of the dynamics that were in the background of this book.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually have quite a few discussion questions in the back that are nice about that, and a whole lot of back matter, which is super cool. I love nonfiction back matter in a book. I think more adult books need it. But so you do have a lot of back matter, like glossary, discussion questions, and you also have in your author's note kind of a blurb or a page about each of the different countries and their history before, during, and after the events of this book. So it feels like you did a lot of research, and you kind of spoke a little bit earlier about doing research on the hippie trail and kind of what civic life was like for all these countries at the time. Was there any part of that research or any part of your mother-in-law's trip on the hippie trail that you thought was really cool, or really wanted to include but just couldn't find a way to get it in the book?
So yes, and also no, because like I had to go back and forth on this one, and like sort of like look back on the research that I had done, because I'm one of those people that was just like fixating on like an interesting fact or detail and found some kind of way to include it, like sort of ensuring that like grocery stores. What would a British Pakistani girl call a grocery store? She wouldn't call it a grocery store. She would call it a shop, right? When her mom is done and paying for the grocery, she doesn't pay for it at the cash register. She pays for it at the till. So everything like from sort of some language choices to, what was the recommended dish on the pudding shop menu, right? Which was like the one that has like chicken in it. I really wanted to include all those details because I would happen across them, and it just would bother me too much, and I had to include it. It's like I had to include it. I'm not sure if anyone else will pick up on this, but if even one person does, it's worth it. Even if that person is me, I guess. But there is one small detail that is sort of early in the book about an abandoned tape recorder that Zubaydah, Zeyna's mom, leaves behind, and then Zeyna kind of takes and actually plays a critical role in it in some of her adventures. But that tape recorder in the story was used by Zeyna's mom to communicate with Zeyna's grandmother in Pakistan. So that tape recorder detail was based on an art project in the UK called the Tape Letters Project. And it's sort of the Tape Letters Project, sort of played some of those recordings between, recently immigrated folks in England, talking about their day, talking about what was going on, and sending these cassettes back to Pakistan and sort of mailing these cassettes back and forth as a way of communication. What's implicit in that sort of detail, and that I wasn't able to explore, is that British Pakistani immigration happened about a generation ahead of like Pakistani immigration to the United States. So it happened as early as the 60s. So as you say, like quite recently after partition, sometimes even earlier, sometimes even late 50s. And so for British Pakistani immigration, what I think was slightly different than immigration to the United States is that it was a mix of sort of skilled and unskilled workers, and I put that in quotes, families that, wanted to communicate did so with tape recording because, they may not have known how to read or write, or if their family back home may not have known to read or write. And the impact that had on self-perception, assimilation, then and perhaps even now. It was a difficult sort of like a nuanced aspect of, I think, British immigration patterns that there wasn't a way to sort of include more explicitly, but I left that in there because I wanted it to be sort of a reminder of a type of British Pakistani immigrant.
That's a super cool project. Yeah, I didn't know about that. So in your author bio that we mentioned at the beginning, and it's in the back of the book, there's a pretty incredible line where you say that your role as a legal services attorney, you became acquainted with people's stories, the ones we tell and the ones we don't, and learned to listen to the stories beneath the surface, which I think is fairly relevant to the whole tape recorder project. What would you consider the story beneath the surface in Zeyna Lost and Found, and what is the next story that you would like to tell?
I think the story beneath the surface is that we never know what someone is grappling with when we meet them, and so it's important to treat, to treat interactions with a level of openness and, I think, willingness to give benefit of the doubt, both when when people meet us and also when we meet them. And so I think just being cognizant of like the context in which we meet people is really important. When we think about Zeyna, people that were meeting her before her parents disappear versus people who are meeting her after may not have understood why she was, sort of doing the things that she was doing, or why she was breaking some rules and, making some unauthorized, decisions. And, but I think the context matters, right? For her, the emergency was so great, the stakes were so high that it really justified doing what she needed to do. And I think there's other characters that are like that. I think, her cousin Amina is like that. Obviously her parents have other things going on. Potentially there's like another character that's introduced that you noted, Lauren, that also has like additional context. And so I think it's important to remember perhaps that what we might be saying with our words or what we might be doing in the physical space or the physical realm does not cover everything that's going on both internally and in our life, beyond what we see. And so I think important takeaway is to, listen to the story beneath the surface, because I think we can go further. And I think, back to the work that I did as a legal services attorney, this ended up being such a critical part of, working with clients, because, I'm reminded of this one time when I was working with a client on a clutter case, and she had collected, unused fabric and beautiful ribbons, beautiful gowns, like from a prior life when she was into set design. And so she didn't want, even to save her apartment, which was now at risk because the landlord was like, you have this clutter condition, you'll be evicted now. She didn't even want to, edit down those or rather throw those things out, because she was kind of, she kept telling me, she was like, these things are new, like I can't, and I think what she was really trying to say, and what she eventually did say to me, sort of as we gained sort of trust among with each other, is that she was worried about not being able to replace those things, that like her purchase power had changed. And so we worked on, instead of just coming in and categorically removing everything, which would often happen if a city agency was asked to do that, we worked on different ways to edit down the clutter, and she ended up being able to stay in her apartment but not lose all of her things. And so anyway, so I think it's really important to meet people where they are, to think about the stories that they're telling us, of course, but also the ones that they may not be.
Just to realize that maybe what we're seeing isn't the whole picture. We're only seeing one part of the picture, for sure. Yeah, I think this book does a good job of that, because there are a lot of people who are introduced where, as you see them through Zeyna's eyes, and Zeyna normally only knows people through one specific lens or one perspective. And that frequently gets challenged throughout the rest of the book as you learn more about these people, which is always really fun.
Well, I think also I think one other question that you had was, what's the next story that I want to tell?
Yeah.
So just in terms of next stories, I think the next story that I want to tell would be a more contemporary story, and about a girl who might also be trying to solve a mystery. And I think the story that I'd want to tell in this situation, in this new sort of idea that I have, is about sort of another example of someone who's coming of age and wants to belong, but how that belonging looks a little bit different, and it feels a little bit different. Sometimes it is about belonging in a relationship, and so slightly more, I think, specific example of belonging, and I think that is kind of the lens through which I view a lot of my characters, and maybe how I view like my own existence and the world around me. And so I think that the next story will have much of those same themes, and perhaps that will be there will be an element of Zeyna in the next story as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Is that going to be? Are you imagining an older story or still a middle grade?
Actually, I'm thinking about middle grade still.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm working on a middle grade piece. Yeah.
Love a good middle grade book. Awesome. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier, and that we've kind of talked about a little bit, is just how people can be. I think one of the discussion questions actually in the book is how people underestimate Zeyna because of her age, and potentially other factors. But I think it's something that I think feels true to being 12 specifically. It's a good age because she's old enough to take all of these adventures by herself, but still young enough to be underestimated and kind of dismissed by most of society. And I thought that was a really good aspect of the book, and that people just underestimate her all the time because she's so young, but that gives her access to then sneak up on people and go into places unnoticed. And
it's actually I highly recommend this tactic in life, by the way, just for everybody, who's listening, that I think it's really important sometimes to have people underestimate you a little bit so you can surprise them, or also, come out on top in some ways. And I think Zeyna has an element of this. Like, I think she kind of starts off feeling a little bit like disgruntled by the fact that she's underestimated all the time, and that she's kind of disregarded and her theories are disregarded, but I think she's also feels validated, like that some of my theories were correct, and also because you underestimated me, I was able to fly under the radar on a lot of stuff to make it possible to resolve this conflict. And so I think it's a necessary part of transitioning into, being a sort of an older person, right, and being a teen and whatnot. And so I think I want my readers to feel like they are heard and seen, and that their questions, their relentless questions often are a really important part of growing up and understanding the world around you. And that's exactly what Zeyna is trying to do. She has to ask those questions because she has to know. And so if you can't give her an answer, then you should probably get out of the way, because she will figure out the answer herself.
Yeah, absolutely. She is a formidable character. Once again, in the author's note, you have so much in the author's note. You also mentioned a warm-hearted school librarian who gave enthusiastic recommendations to you in your enchanting school library. What kind of books did you read as a kid, and what do you think is really important about books who get kids interested in reading?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so like Mrs. Murray was her name, and she was amazing. She was like this librarian who just like, I don't even know, like she just knew exactly what we needed at any given point. And so, I remember at one point I was just like tearing through like Babysitter Club series, and she would just like always make sure, like there was like so many of those books, and we were in Saudi Arabia, remember, like, and we used to get books through like a mail order catalog, and so, but she would always make sure that she knew that there was which books people were reading, and how do we make sure that we have enough so that people never kind of get like never have to feel like they've there's not enough to read on that, and so I just remember like tearing through like Babysitters Club series, like then earlier, like I remember she was like always recommending like Ramona and Beezus, and I fell in love with Beezus, like Quimby. Like I'll just forever feel like I'm a Beezus. But I think but actually maybe I'm also a Ramona, I don't know, but anyways, I think it's just the fact that she was anticipating what the reader needs at the different stages of their development was a really key part of how she cultivated a love of learning and of reading. And also like the physical space of the library was so welcoming. And I feel I see this a lot in indie bookstores, actually, is like just that you could sit down. Of course, there was like reading spaces, of course, but then there was also just like wide enough like aisles for you to just like plop down where you are, and you never felt ashamed to be there if you had like started reading your book right there in the aisle before checking it out. She just let you be. And I find that to be the case in a lot of bookstores that are close to us, like Linden Tree and Los Altos being an example. I think one of the booksellers there was on the panel as well for the Indies Introduced. And I think it was such an important part of that, of what made that library so special. So it was like her curating the books to be responsive, but then also her like curating the space to be welcoming. And so I think when we're thinking about instilling a love of reading, it's so important to just read whatever it is that you find interesting, right? So like, I mean, I'm now 40 years old, and I loved Sayantani Dasgupta's Kiranmala's series, which is a middle grade book. I love City Spies. Like I will read middle grade books probably until, my deathbed. Because I just think that that's what I find fun. And I want to read, books that I find fun. And so whatever it is that floats your boat, I think follow that, because sometimes I think we feel like, we have to sort of give due credit to the canon, and we should, right? I mean, I do think we should ideally, but I also think that right now, given the demands on our attention, it's so important to lean into whatever strikes your interest. And I feel like I do that a lot now with my kids. And so reading is a big part of I think how they identify like how they see themselves, but also how they want to spend their time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I live in an area with a lot of kids who struggle to read. And I think there's a kind of inherent elitism with books sometimes, especially that certain people will have, where like you have to read a quality book, and qualities in quotes, because whatever that means, right, to that person.
Exactly.
And I think children's books tend to get kind of the short stick a lot of the time, where adults just don't think children's books are for them, but they're for everyone.
Yes.
Everyone should read kids' books.
Oh my gosh. Like I, during COVID, I felt like I relied more on middle grade books, actually, because of the fact that it was like, and that's actually what I think got me back on that track, frankly, on the middle grade track versus like just sort of reading adult fiction. And it really unlocked something in me. I was like reading, I was reading, look, even when I'm talking about adult fiction, I'm talking about like PG Woodhouse. And like, I just like love, a good sort of like, I love comedy in my books, but I think it's really important to reduce/remove any barriers to reading right now, because there's such an onslaught of information in different ways. And I think it's important to slow down, and reading helps you slow down a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It also helps you get different perspectives on things and be a little introspective as well, which is always good.
Yes.
So back to Zeyna, you did mention humor and reading books that are funny. Zeyna is very funny. And early on in the interview, you did also mention a couple of jokes that may fall flat. So what are one of the jokes that you think no one is going to get except for you?
Well, I just think some of the banter between Zeyna and Maher, like I think is quite funny, where neither one of them wants to be the last person to, like, everyone wants to get the last word in. And I find that to be such a good example of how brothers and sisters communicate, but also I find that to be really funny because, what are we even doing at some level, right? Like in this conversation, but one of us is going to win. So let's figure out who the winner is. So I think a lot of the Zeyna Maher jokes, I think a lot of her sort of insisting that she's Sherlock and he's Watson, right? I mean, like the emphasis on being the big dog and like who's the leader right now. Like I always find those kinds of dynamics to be very hilarious amongst kids, and so I hope people will find that funny. But I had a beta reader who read the manuscript, and she herself was 10 years old at the time. And I was like, she's like, yeah, I really liked it. This part was nice and this part. And I was like, did you think it was funny? And she was like, no, I didn't. I was so mortified. And so, and then her mom was like, no, Shafaq, like it was actually really funny. And I was like, I don't know if it's that great that you think it's funny. She doesn't think it's, so it was like a very hilarious, there was one scene that she thought was that my 10-year-old beta reader thought was really funny, which was, this relative of Zeyna's in Pakistan rummaging through a chicken and rice dish and trying to like get the best piece of chicken, and then she kind of gets annoyed at him and like nicks his glasses and then does an impression of him, because one of Zeyna's many talents is that she does impressions, no offensive impressions, by the way, just very hilarious impressions. And so she does an impression of him, and that for some reason like really resonated with this 10-year-old. She was like, I can get down with that. So again, I think some will fall flat and some won't. You have to just keep on trying those. So
yeah, I found it funny, but I am not 10, so I don't know. We'll see when kids pick it up. Okay, so as a last question, the main audience of this interview will be booksellers. So what do you want booksellers to know about your book as we put it in readers' hands? And if people walk away from this interview with just remembering one thing about your book, what do you want that one thing to be?
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank the American Booksellers Association again for the Indies Introduce, and also for this podcast, for having me on this podcast, and really to all the booksellers out there that are just working so hard to cultivate a love of learning and a love of reading, by just being so discerning about the books that they keep in their bookstores, and ensuring that the experience, like once you're there, is welcoming for everyone. We need that now more than ever. So the one thing I would say I want indie booksellers to remember is that I believe that this book is for everyone, whether you're an aspiring detective or you're like the pragmatist telling your friend not to be an aspiring detective. This book is for you. Zeyna Lost and Found will, I think, hopefully, scratch your itch if you love mysteries, if you love traveling, you love good and bad jokes, and bonus points if you like all three of those things. So I really hope that you have tons of fun with Zeyna Lost and Found.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for writing, Zeyna, and thank you for being on this podcast with us in this interview. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA site at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!